Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Hope we're all having a great week this week and that you all have some wonderful weekend plans coming up. I know we've got some soccer game to go to with my daughter and get to spend some time with family. So love I would love to know what some of your weekend plans are down in the chat or comment section, however you're listening to this today. Let's kind of jump into sometime soon to when it was, released. If you're watching this 3 years in the future, obviously things will be different. But those of you that are in the current time, know that the presidential election's coming up. And this is obviously a really big election, and at this time of year, so it's, kind of beginning, middle of October, and the election is always, in the beginning of November. During this time of year is typically during the election cycle when I get a lot of fatigue, get tired of seeing all the commercials, seeing all the polls, and all that jazz. It just starts to wear on you after a while, and just get ready for the election to be over with. I know that I kind of get this way, and it's really important that while that's legitimate, to not let that make you apathetic. I know, especially for a lot of Christians, that looking at the top of the ticket, so the presidential race, um, look, there's no getting around this. Many Christians do have some issues with Trump's personality and his antics and morality. And mind you, there's some legitimate complaints there. I'm not discounting that. But that can almost take you to like, what's the point? It's just going to be bad any which way. Now I've discussed this on some other podcast here that we do have to evaluate the other side of the aisle, and I'm kind of preaching to the choir for most of you that are tuning into this that the other side of the aisle, the Democratic side, does not have a lot of great morality. Certainly, some lifestyle disagreements there on the other end. But what I'm trying to get at here is we need to be careful on the apathy. One, and I will continue to harp this, that the top of the ticket, the presidential race, very important. You won't get me to say otherwise. It is absolutely important. But there are a ton of other issues there that you need to look at. I would tell you a resource that I actually use often. I took a look at this actually just yesterday because there's always different things on the ballot. Congressmen that you're electing, both state and federal, Senate, same thing. And then there's state questions that are generally a part of during the presidential election. There's generally some state questions on there. Some states may have a governor race. There's just stuff all over the place. But I always like to go to ballotpedia.com because you can actually put in your address. And what I like about it too is it has email as optional. So you don't have to put your email, your information in there, so they send you all this junk. But you just put your address in there, and it shows you what your ballot will actually look like, and that gives you some time to be able to research a little bit on there. And Ballotpedia actually has to where some candidates can actually fill out information on there, especially some of the local ones. You may not see everything put on there, but it does give you some decent information there. And lets you have some time to think through, how am I going to vote on some of these things? I'll also say that as far as preparation here goes, is just making that preparation to vote. You've got to make it a priority. What's that going to look like for you? For my wife and I, we're actually facing a very unique circumstance that we're going to be moving into our new house very soon, and we've had to look at, well, where are we going to vote? And it turned out for us that you know since we don't know when we're going to move in, we're like, do we change our voting registration yet? we're actually not going to close on our current house until after the election. So that's kind of taken care of. But you need to think through those things. Do you have a vacation coming up? What if you get sick? Do you want to go ahead and do early voting? Do you want to vote by mail? Make some plans here to do it beforehand, and go in there with some do some homework. Said Ballotpedia is a great resource. Check out for the local stuff. Try to check out local Facebook groups and local newspapers, things like that. Sometimes our local newspaper will have like a voting guide that talks about candidates and state questions and all that jazz. Just do a little bit of homework. Inevitably, you're not going to know every little thing, but like if you have a candidate come by your house, ask them some questions. How are you going to handle these issues? But do your homework now. Don't just wait until you get to the voting booth, or don't wait till voting day and like, oh crud, I don't have time to get to the polls or whatever. Plan now, and make it important that you need to think these things through, and that leads into the the text that we'll be going into today, which is Jeremiah 29:7. That why some of this stuff matters. I mentioned some of the stuff with, especially Christians towards Trump, which is very legitimate with some of their concerns. But at the end of the day, these elections do have consequences, and you need to be able to look at yourself and not just say, "All right, this is the person that is necessarily even my first choice or what I'm most comfortable with, but is this choice going to provide well for the country, provide well for the country or for our culture? Is it going to put us in a better direction than maybe the alternative there?" Because I know many people there say, "Well, hey, my number one choice or what I would like it to look like isn't there." Fair enough. But there are some realities here. So let's get into the text here. I'm actually going to back up a little bit into, let's say, verse 4. So Jeremiah 29, verse 4. And we're actually going to go down through verse 7 and focus mostly on 7. So Jeremiah 29:4. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon: build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. Then verse 7. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Now, if you don't know much about some of the Bible history and kind of what was going on in God's people here in the Old Testament, this is in the Old Testament, and essentially, before all this, Israel, they said, "Hey, we wanted a king," and then God gave him a king, and things kind of went downhill. They split into Israel and Judah, and then they got taken away from their land. They were sent into exile. So they were no longer in Jerusalem, which I'm assuming most of you know what Jerusalem is. Obviously, a very important city there. They were taken away. So that who Jeremiah is talking to here, he's not saying, "Hey, you're going to be here in Jerusalem and things are going to be great." No, they were taken away, taken into Babylon. Things were very bad. No, it was not a good situation for God's people here. Um, but God didn't say in this case, "Hey, do everything you can to get back into Jerusalem right this very second." No, he had a plan here. He put his people into exile for a reason. I mean, they did a lot of really bad stuff. But he didn't say be in contention with the Babylonians there. Build houses, live in these houses, plant gardens, eat their produce, take wives, have sons and daughters, live life. Make the best of things there. And here's where I'm getting at here too. We know as Christians that ultimately, this earth is not our home. Ultimately, we know that um, whenever the day comes that we die, that we will be in heaven, exalting Jesus there in heaven. That's where our true home is. However, I'm not going to say that we're in exactly the same situation like the Judeans and Israelites were. Um, but this is the place that God has us for now. As long as you're living, you're taking breath, you have a purpose, whether you're in Oklahoma like I am, or Texas, or Florida, or Indonesia, or wherever that you're located at. God has given you a purpose for where you're at now. I think we see this sometimes in Christian circles where we're so focused on the spiritual, like big stuff up in heaven and all of that, that we're like, what basically whatever happens here doesn't matter. And it's just not true. Now, what happens here does matter. Now, are there things beyond this presidential election? And can we look at verses that would say, "Hey, we need to trust God's plan regardless of um, the results of elections"? Absolutely, agreed 100%. But we do need to care. We do need to be able to vote, to engage the culture, and to not just sit back on the sidelines. And I think what's interesting here when it says seek the welfare of the city, um, where I've sent you into exile, it it's really saying like, hey, try to try to make Babylon as good as you can make it. We don't want you to just kind of live in this little bubble and only do things by yourself. Like we want if I placed you here, try to make this place as good as possible. Seek the welfare. Make the whole place as good as you can make it there. And so I was reading this, researching for this episode, just really kind of thinking that of where we're at in this election. Look, God's in control here. He's going to make whoever wins that he wants to win, right? Like he's sovereign. He's got this under control. But don't just be sitting on the sideline. Whatever happens, happens. It's the lesser of two evils. It's no big deal. Like seek the welfare there. You think Babylon wasn't doing bad things? Like Babylon was doing some really bad things. They didn't care about God, and they were the Judeans here were still called to be able to care for the welfare of the city there. Go into the elections with that type of mindset. Who am I voting for here that I believe is going to increase the welfare of my community, of my state, of my country? From the choices that you have, what is going to help increase this welfare? I think that is the filter we need to put this into instead of the perfect option. Look, in this case, the perfect option would be one, Israel wouldn't have even split up in the first place and they would be living in unity back in Jerusalem. But that's not what was going on. They were in exile, they were out of their country, but they still needed to live life. And God called them to seek that welfare there. But on here too, and just finishing out kind of the verse here, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, meaning the city, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So remember this too, that we're not just voting and doing these things of, oh, we're gonna figure it all out. Like we've got this all under control, and there's we don't need God. No, like we need to be in prayer towards the Lord for the election, for anything going on in your community, um, but praying for your state, for your city, for your community, for your school board, for the president, that we pray on the behalf of these communities, that there would be more welfare, more care, and I'm using this word welfare since it's in the text here. We don't mean welfare as like we kind of use it in today's terminology of basically just handouts essentially. Welfare is just well-being. That the whole community is healthy. Pray that these elections, that God would use these elections to bring health to our society, to our culture, to our community, to your schools, wherever that you may be. That yes, how we vote does matter, but pray for your leaders. I'll be straight up honest that I am guilty of this. That if I don't really like president or congressman or woman or whatever, that it's hard for me to pray on their behalf. But we need to anyways. Right now, whether you like it or not, right now Joe Biden is the president. Um, Whether Kamala Harris is becomes president, or Trump or whoever may be, your leaders are placed there by God, and we need to pray for their hearts, pray for their souls, but also pray that they would help bring well-being to our society. Even if you really doubt that, um, still praying for direction that God would bring well-being to our society. Because quite frankly, and talked about this many times, that an election is not going to solve all of our problems. It's not going to fix all of our culture, but it is an important piece here. So, along with praying for our elected leaders, praying for how the elections turn out, just praying for our culture, that we would seek revival in this culture, and bring well being to the culture. But at the end of the day, some homework items here. Look up your local elections, go to Ballotpedia, look at your newspaper or whatever it may be that shows what you are actually voting for, not just the president. Go beyond that, go to every little line item and educate yourself on there. And two, make a plan to vote. Again, I'm not going to tell you exactly how you need to vote on all of those things. Um, but we do need to engage the welfare of our communities. I do think this is a moral thing to show up and engage in the political process. That does not mean that everything's going to go perfectly, but make a plan. Do you need to vote early and just bank it in? Are you going to be gone? Do you need to do absentee? If you're going to vote, when's going to be a time that you can take off work, or are you going to do it on your lunch break or whatever it may be? Make a plan now. Don't wait till election day to do this, because we do need to engage in the political process to help bring welfare to our communities. All right. I hope you all have a great weekend and you take care.